Welcome to the Paradigm Shift on 4ZZZ 102.1, where we challenge the assumptions of our current society to resist depression and investigate alternative ways of living, for a world based on justice, solidarity and sustainability. Welcome to the Paradigm Shift on 4ZZZ 102.1 FM. It's your local community radio station. My name is Andy and I will be with you for the next hour. I'm coming to you this week from Berry Country in sort of central Queensland, and up here this has been the location, or one of the locations, of one of Australia's biggest environmental campaigns over the last decade, the fight against the Adani coal mine. And unfortunately, despite a lot of incredible efforts from people trying to protect our planet, Adani's mine has been built, and it's now time for a lot of us who have been involved to think about what are the lessons learned from this campaign and where do we go from here. Of course, the climate doesn't the fight to protect our climate doesn't stop just because one mine's been built. Every little bit of carbon emissions that can be stopped will make climate change a little bit less bad, and so we've got to keep going. But hopefully we can learn some lessons from all the work that's been done in recent years, and I think it's very important to reflect on these things, so I'm happy to be doing that on today's show. And I think it's also good to talk about strategy of how we create change. So often our media is full of things that are bad, or occasionally we might talk to, especially here in the Paradigm Shift, we talk to people that are trying to do good, but I think it is really valuable to talk about how do we make change. If there's, in the case of climate change, a lot of Australians that care a lot about this issue, how do we mobilise that into real power that can change things? And so that's a bit of what we hope to talk about on the show and reflect on how we've been doing it over recent years and how we can maybe do it better. I speak first to Moira Williams, who is part of Tipping Point, an organisation that was instrumental in the Stop Adani campaign. Then I'll speak to Christian Slattery from Market Forces about some of the corporate campaigning that was a real development, I think, in how we make change over the course of the Adani campaign. And then I speak to Alice from Frontline Action on coal about the blockading aspect, the direct action, how that could have been done better, and how we'll go forward with that. So stick around, it will be a very informative show, I promise you. And let's start off by hearing from Moira Williams.
My name's Moira Williams. I'm an organiser with Tipping Point, a collective of Friends of the Earth.
So Tipping Point is one of many environmental groups and individuals around the country who over the last half a decade or a bit more have been working on the Stop Adani campaign. It's been one of the big climate campaigns in Australia. What's been your personal involvement in this campaign?
I moved to Mackay and worked with Mackay Conservation Group in 2014 when I first heard about the plans to expand the Galley Basin, and with massive expansions across the Great Barrier Reef coastline and the mines themselves. And so, a variety of kind of paid and unpaid roles working on everything from stopping those coal port expansions to supporting groups in the Stop Adani campaign for the last 3 to 4 years. So supporting and connecting local groups in their communities to take action to stop the Adani mine.
Now, there's lots to be said about that campaign, but I guess at the end of the day, it didn't stop the Adani mine, which is now operational. I guess briefly, I mean, what's your assessment of that campaign?
Yeah, I think right now there's lots of conversations happening about that. Obviously, we did make it a national campaign, and I think by the end, Adani, Stop Adani movement was really in the nation's consciousness and became a powerful symbol for resistance to the coal industry, with good reason. It was one of the few untapped coal reserves on the planet that, our government was backing to dig up. So there was, it became quite a powerful flashpoint in the campaign across the globe to end coal. Obviously, yes, it's at the end of the day, we're up against a very well-backed billionaire, a man who's become the richest man in India and had a lot of resources as well as government backing at all levels. And so we were truly up against it when it came to finally stopping that individual project. But there's been huge wins along the way. 10 years ago when we were looking at the expansion of the Galilee Basin, there was a lot of coal port expansions at Abbott Point and Mackay, and a lot of those all of them have not gone ahead. And right now it's looking like, we've done enough to delay and toxify this project and push enough companies away and have enough resistance on the ground that the other mines slated for the Galilee Basin are also either stalled or cancelled. So I think ultimately we did not, hashtag Stop Adani, but we have significantly delayed that project by over 8 years. They still have not, it's going to be a much downscaled project from the 60 million tonnes. That it's likely to be much smaller, and we've definitely likely stopped a lot of those other projects. So it's important to reflect on the bigger mission, I think, of keeping Galilee coal in the ground. Along the way, we've also had big wins across the broader coal industry. So I think around half the companies that have ruled out the Adani coal mine have also developed broader coal policies to rule out mining in thermal coal. And so that's a significant shift in the industry. And so I think, again, the Stop Adani campaign has been a flashpoint to push companies to have better policies on climate and coal.
It's one of the things about the strategy of this campaign, I guess, that some people might have questioned. The fact there's a lot of coal mines in Australia, a lot in Queensland, and even this part of Queensland, and so much effort and energy went into the Adani mine while others were being, expanded, approved. I mean, what was the reasoning behind just targeting Adani, and do you think that was a good decision?
Yeah, really legitimate questions, especially in Queensland when there is so much coal and gas being developed. I think, I don't think we ever felt like this was, we didn't predict the scale of this campaign and movement when it started off. I guess the reasoning was because the Galilee Basin alone in its emissions was hugely significant, and there has to be, drawing a line in the sand around new coal basins and new coal mines we felt was particularly important. And, in the early days it was a broader sort of fight for the reef campaigns, lots of organisations focusing on the Galilee. As it narrowed, it became clear that the only way other companies were going to get into the mining the basin was if Adani could build the railway line, which is why the focus on Adani was important, to stop those other companies getting in. I think, it has real benefits in being able to tell a really clear, powerful story and capture the hearts and minds of people, and people love a villain and they love that fight against one villain. It's a very simple story to tell, and I think that's why there was so much movement momentum. And the challenge is now how we take that movement momentum and use it to have broader impact on the industry. And a lot of the other a lot of the mines in Queensland, we do still have new greenfield, like new mines, and a lot of expansions happening. So that's a really important question about how we take lessons from the campaign to fight some of those other mines.
You at Tipping Point are one of many environmental NGOs around the country, and especially since the Liberal government's been in power, there's been quite an attack on NGOs and environment NGOs in particular, and I guess the threats to taking away the tax deductible status of NGOs if they were involved in any law-breaking activity sort of in some ways hobbled these groups when it came to using some of the tactics the environment movement has up its sleeve. What do you think has been the effect of that on this movement?
Yeah, it's concerning when we see these attacks, and the latest changes to the laws, I think, made organisations pretty risk averse around supporting any kind of bolder activities on the ground, let's say, or protest activities. And that relates to both non-violent direct action, but also like pointy political work where you're trying to push for particular candidates to get into power. So I think there's DGR status. Yes, a lot of organisations, they'll only get funded if they can collect donations that are tax deductible. So that constrains organisations. And when they know they're under the, watch of the ACNC and the Liberal governments who are breathing down their necks and saying, well, is that really in line with your purpose? And we know that those attacks are ideological and opposed to, peaceful protests. So I think it has had an impact in the ability of those organisations to support, in particular, action on the ground. And it's important that as a movement, we're standing up to those attacks. We're defending our right to peacefully protest.
Are there any other thoughts, I guess, about lessons learned about tactics or strategy that have come from this long campaign?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it points back to your earlier point around making why the focus on one company. I do feel like that had the benefit of a single focus. It has the downside of perhaps, we aren't looking elsewhere, but it was really useful for focusing movement pressure. And I think we showed through the campaign that if we're coordinated as a movement, we can really have significant wins. Like you look at the $1 billion NAIF loan so the federal government wanted to give Adani $1 billion. The Queensland government had the power to stop or veto that loan. And at the start of that campaign, that particular push, we had MPs telling us, they couldn't veto the loan. There's no way they were going to do it. We had strategists telling us it wasn't possible. And I think through a concerted community campaign right across the country that, raised concerns about the public money going to coal, we did do the impossible, which was, force the Queensland government to rule out the loan. So I think the lesson there is that when you work to get the public on side, particularly as we did around, maybe we didn't get the whole public on side, particularly in central Queensland, around supporting, stopping the mine, but we did get the broader Queensland public on side around the ability to say no to taxpayer dollars propping up, a $1 billion mining magnate who wants to build a coal mine. So I think there's important lessons there around, we need to build public support for our demands, and when we do, we are more successful. But also as a movement, when we're targeted, when we're coordinated, when we all push at once, we can have really significant wins. And I think we saw that time and time again through the campaign to push individual companies out of the project. Groups like Galley Blockade really pioneering the work to push contractors out of the project. I think I've never seen anything like that work done, and their campaign to get down or out of the project meant that Adani then had to, cobble together a whole bunch of subcontractors that did shoddy work, that slowed them down, that cost them money, that pushed up their insurance premiums, and all of this has come out in the court case with Ben Pennings. So I think a lot of those grassroots groups have really pioneered tactics that we haven't used as a coal anti-coal movement before, whether that's pushing insurance companies, pushing contractors, and there's real opportunities in how we use those new tactics to focus on other coal companies and end coal mining in Australia.
Well, it sounds like a good segue to talk about what comes next after the Adani campaign.
Yeah, well, I imagine lots of groups are thinking about where to next, and lots of different groups have been involved in this campaign, and they may go off and focus on different things. But as Tipping Point, we're starting to have conversations around where is the power of the existing Stop Adani movement and that local group network best placed, and we're seeing big opportunities to use those lessons, as I said, to focus on some of the key pillars of corporate support for the industry. So being finance, we know there's 6 banks in Australia that largely finance the coal industry here, some of the big 4. And we know there's a small number of contractors that pretty much prop up all those projects as well. So big opportunities to continue to use those lessons to get bigger wins across the industry, not just getting them to push out, say, the Adani mine, but push them to rule out working with all coal companies. I also think, we've learned big lessons around, standing in solidarity with affected communities, and I think there has been a lot of critique around the Stop Adani campaign not engaging enough with local communities that were affected, and that was always a big blocker to getting more action on this campaign, is that we didn't have local community support, and big questions around transitioning coal communities away from coal. And so I think with a broader campaign, we really need to look at how we centre this idea of justice for communities across the world that are being impacted by coal, from the Wangan and Jagalingou people who right now are resisting on country and fighting for their own justice and to get land back, and to protect the Dungulala Springs, to communities that are living in the places where the Australian coal is being burnt and they're suffering the impacts of pollution, to our friends in the Pacific who are fighting for their lives because of the impacts of climate change driven by Australian coal. And so we really want to tell that story and have that much more front and centre, because I think as climate, as these floods have shown, like, climate change is here and now, the impacts are getting worse and worse, and there's a real opportunity to start to talk more about the people that are impacted by these, by the Australian coal industry, propped up by banks that we give our money to and propped up by particular insurance and contracted companies. So I think huge opportunities to unite all of those communities facing those impacts, to say it's no longer fair or just that a small number of people make billions of dollars when so many communities' lives are at risk.
So Tipping Point has a campaign they've been talking about, Beyond Coal. I guess if people are interested in finding out more about that, how can they do that?
Yeah, good question. I think people hate the name Beyond Coal, so that's not the name. We've got to work out the name. Yeah, we had an online webinar recently, which happy to send to anyone if you email us at info@stopadani.com, that is starting that conversation about really where to from here. And in terms of the key next steps, like, you can sign up to the Stop Adani database for now, and we'll definitely send you updates of where to next. We'll probably continue those conversations as we start to shape up the campaign. But there's also important opportunities for people to stand in solidarity, the Wangan and Jagalingou people who, as I said, Cody McAvoy's leading the Wadanangu ceremony out on country, continuing to protect his land and fight for their sovereignty. So their website is standingourground.org.au. They have an important legal challenge against the Queensland government at the moment for destroying their sacred sites. So there's lots of important work to donate to their campaign, to head out to Wadanangu, or head out to the Tour de Carmichael, which is an amazing bike ride into the mine site at the end of May. And all of that info is on their website, standingourground.org.au as well.
Okay, thanks very much, Moira.
No worries, thanks Andy.
That was Moira Williams from Tipping Point, one of the organisations who did a lot of the planning and work around Stop Adani, just reflecting on how that campaign went, what we learnt and what is next. And of course the climate movement doesn't stop with the Adani mine being built, which is why I'm making this show. Now there's plenty of other groups that were working on the Adani campaign as well as Tipping Point. One of them is Market Forces, who have a very interesting role. They are in the business world, are researching what companies are involved in the fossil fuel industry and are trying to lobby those companies out of it, trying to use financial markets to pressure companies to do the right thing environmentally. And I spoke with Christian Slattery from Market Forces to talk to him about the Adani campaign and about what's next.
My name is Christian Slattery. I'm a campaigner at Market Forces.
And the Adani campaign, it's been a big environmental campaign over the last decade or most of a decade. What's been your personal involvement in it?
Yeah, so I worked with the Australian Conservation Foundation for about 3 years on the Stop Adani campaign. And actually my first kind of foray into environmental activism was turning up to some of the banks protests while I was a university student and rallying outside their offices to get them to divest. And I think that's, sort of testament to how successful the campaign has been in building a really big and bold movement of people who want to take action on the climate crisis and move Australia beyond coal.
And Market Forces, can you tell us a bit about what it does as an organisation?
Yeah, so Market Forces is an environmental advocacy organisation. We focus on financial institutions that are funding environmentally destructive projects like the Carmichael coal mine. We've been around since about 2013. We're an affiliate of Friends of the Earth Australia. And yeah, our work is really focused on exposing financial institutions like banks and superannuation funds that are funding fossil fuels and working with the community to hold them accountable for that funding.
It has been one of the big, I think, tactical developments in the Adani campaign, this way of targeting sort of third-party finance companies or contractors who might work on the mine. Is that how it feels at Market Forces, that this campaign has sort of forged a bit of new ground?
Yeah, I think that's right, Andy. I think, some of the biggest successes of the Stop Adani campaign have been in getting financial institutions in particular to rule out investment in the project and, introduce broader coal policies as well. We saw that with the big four Australian banks back in 2016, 17. And then, as you and your listeners would be very familiar, we've seen a whole slew of dozens and dozens of companies ruling out involvement in the Carmichael coal project. And I think I saw the other day we're up to 112 companies now, which is just an incredible testament to the really tireless grassroots activism of thousands of people across this country, taking action on banks and insurers and contractors and a whole lot of other companies, telling them not to get involved in this toxic project.
Yeah, it's certainly not usual commercial practice to make a statement saying you're not going to take a contract. I mean, it really does show the effects of the campaign against Adani, that all these companies felt that they had to do that.
Yeah, I think it's a testament to how strong the opposition to Adani has been, led by the Wangan and Jagalingou traditional owners, and then, joined by many, many thousands of people across this country who see this project as an absolute, litmus test of Australia's commitment to taking action on climate change. And it's wonderful that activism has taken place, and so many other coal projects that were proposed in the Galilee Basin have stalled or been cancelled. Some of the big infrastructure that was planned for development along many of the ports and rail lines in the Galilee Basin has been stopped. And the Adani coal project itself is no longer progressing at the size that was originally planned. And that is really a wonderful outcome of the campaign that I think we should really hold on to and take to other companies and use the lessons of this campaign to take on other companies that are proposing many other destructive fossil fuel projects.
Yeah, and the big win really is Adani never got a loan from a financial organisation and have had to self-finance the mine, which has limited the size that they can build, as well as the other infrastructure that they can build. And even though the mine's built, that is quite a significant win in reducing how much coal they can burn.
Yeah, it's been the fact that they've had to self-finance this project is a demonstration of how effective the campaign has been in stopping private sector involvement in the company and in the project. And as I understand it, that extends now to insurers as well. That Adani are having a lot of trouble finding insurance for their disastrous coal project. And again, that's because the Stop Adani campaign has effectively held up the toxicity of the Adani coal project to insurers in Australia, in Europe, in the UK, and said, your reputation is on the line if you become involved in this project.
So looking forward then for Market Forces in the work that you do within the corporate sector around the environment, what comes next after Adani?
Yeah, well, I think it's an interesting time to be having this conversation. Obviously, the United Nations published their latest environment and climate report last week, the IPCC report. And I think that the UN Secretary General really hit the nail on the head when he said in releasing that report that some government and business leaders are saying one thing but doing another. Simply put, they are lying. And I think that really crystallizes where we're at with a lot of the statements by financial institutions in this country. We have Australia's big four banks all saying they support the Paris Agreement and the goals of limiting temperature rise, global warming to 1.5 degrees. They say they support the goal of achieving net zero emissions globally by 2050, yet all of those banks are continuing to loan billions of dollars to companies and projects that are expanding the fossil fuel industry. And so when they say that, what they are doing is saying one thing about taking climate action and doing another by continuing to finance the very projects that are contributing to this problem. So what we need from the big four banks is for them to actually stay true to their word and stop funding fossil fuel expansion projects and the companies that are building them as well.
So if people are interested in finding out more about what Market Forces does, or they're interested in getting involved in that kind of corporate activism, how can they find out more?
Sure. The best way to get involved would be just to visit our website, www.marketforces.org.au. And yeah, you can jump online, learn more about our work, register to support our campaigns, and we'll keep you updated. And we'd love to have you on board.
Okay. Thanks very much, Christian.
Thanks, Andy.
You are listening to The Paradigm Shift on 4ZZZ. We were talking with Christian Slattery from Market Forces and about their role in the Adani campaign and their plans for what's next. And the last interview I have is with Alice from Frontline Action on coal, as well as other direct action groups. And we talked about that aspect of the campaign, the blockading, the locking onto machines, how that went, and what's next for climate direct action in this country.
My name's Alice, and I've been involved in direct action around Australia for the past 6 or 7 years. About 5 years ago, I first came up to, well, it was Camp Nudja back then, now it's Camp Bimby, to be involved in the kind of front line of blockading Adani. And I've been back and forth in and out for the last 5 years, and I'm also involved in direct action in other parts of the country.
So direct action was a big part of the Adani campaign over the last 8 years. Both in cities there were blockades, and as well as plenty here on the front line, directly stopping work on the Adani line. I guess what's your assessment about the effectiveness of direct action as part of this campaign?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think it's definitely really, really important. I mean, we haven't won the campaign. We have less of a loss than we otherwise would. The Adani mine's a lot smaller than it otherwise would be, but I think direct action's definitely added to growing the movement, getting more people involved, and costing Adani and its contractors lots and lots of money. So I think it's been really useful, both in the bringing attention to the issue, costing the companies money, therefore making it harder for them to actually do the destructive project, as well as empowering people from all over the country, because one of the most beautiful things about living at Camp Bimby is you see what happens when somebody arrives and realises that they don't need to ask anymore. They might have signed some petitions or talked to their MPs, but they can actually sit down in front of the construction or in front of a coal train or help someone to do that, while at the same time making collective decisions together and creating a world that is much more democratic and just. So for me, that's been the most important parts of a kind of direct action blockade is, showing people what the world could be like and empowering people in that way.
What do you think have been some of the hindrances that made direct action maybe not as effective as it could have been?
Well, one of the biggest is, the mine's built in central Queensland. It's so far away from, big cities. It gets so hot in the summer, which is really hard from those of us from the southern states to kind of enjoy being out here. And so, it's quite inaccessible, whereas other blockades, and direct action has been easier to get to. I think as well, it's been a lot harder not having a lot of the kind of public-facing groups talk about direct action and normalise it across the movement. So there's obviously been FLAC and Galilee Blockade and others, Galilee Rising and others that talk about the direct action and frontline, but a lot of the kind of mainstream Stop Adani groups from the start haven't been able to talk about it and, use their numbers to inform people that there is an actual blockade, because that was something that I was always surprised living in Melbourne at some points, and some people hadn't even heard of the front line, that there was a blockade. They've been part of Stop Adani groups for a while, and so I think that was one of the hindrances, that it just wasn't that well known or that well resourced to get people up here. Because in the end of the day, we just didn't have the numbers to disrupt enough.
So I did talk to Moira about, I guess, deductive gift recipient status and the way that government has really hobbled some of the tactics that we have for change, and that has been a story of this campaign, hasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's been absolutely huge. And one of the things that we saw, when Extinction Rebellion came into being, and I think one of the reasons that so many people jumped on board that, because it was a public, escalated campaign that a lot of people weren't finding in the regular NGO kind of campaigns. So I think that showed that there is an appetite that people have. They're so frustrated at the lack of climate action, and so people are willing to take that sort of direct action, but people just didn't know about it or didn't have the resources to get up here, which is such a and has been different for other blockades in the past, where NGOs have been able to help out more.
So, I mean, this campaign for direct action, at least, I think we're done with Adani. The mine's built, but there will be other ones. Climate change isn't going away, and sadly, nor is coal mining in Australia. And so, what do you think are some of the lessons that have been learnt from this campaign to take into future ones?
Well, maybe, more strategic thinking and more kind of face-to-face collaboration spaces with all parts of the movement to talk about, if we are, and I think we will have more coal mine blockades because they can and have been reasonably effective, that we need kind of more spaces to talk about how to get that to work. One thing that I've been talking about with some people is how, having a coal mine blockade in central Queensland in the middle of coal country, the Frontline group can go and try and do community engagement and talk about and try and get people on side as much as possible, but you kind of need other groups to do that work instead of, what is often seen as the ferals that are getting in the way of their work. And so building complementary strategies between different groups on the ground, I think could have been really, really useful for this campaign, because at the end of the day, of course, we have some local heroes, supporters that are amazing, but most of the community, Adani has won the local support in heaps of ways. Getting better communication across the groups, which might have helped kind of, NGOs be able to support in more ways. We also need more numbers, and that's the ongoing ever question that nobody's really worked out a really good solution. How do we get thousands of people at a blockade camp? I mean, they did it at Bentley, so we can learn from that, but not all blockades are in the northern rivers.
Yeah. And so I guess looking forward, where does the direct action movement against coal go from here? What things are currently existing or might come into being?
I'm not really sure about current stopping of coal, on the front line, apart from what's going on near Wollongong, which I'm excited to learn more about. In particular with coal, I'm not sure, but I know that there's more kind of systemic, broader reaching groups that are trying to fight for climate action and fight for a better future. People might have heard of Blockade Australia. They've been really trying to stick a stick in the cog of the status quo and bring attention to the crisis. And I'm more personally involved in a group called Blockade IMARC, which is fighting against the International Mining and Resources Conference, which happens in Melbourne each year. It's the biggest mining conference in Australia. It brings, CEOs, miners, all sorts of people from all over the world together to network and make deals and talk about how to dig more things out of the ground. And so it's not focused on coal, because one of the interesting things about IMARC is they've really pivoted with the renewable energy conversation and are trying to position mining as the hero of the transition. But what we're learning is, we definitely need to get out of coal and fossil fuels, but we can't just replace that, growing energy source and growing consumption with renewables, because that will also tip us over in terms of climate change, as well as destroy land, water and life. So there's another space that I think people, there's definitely overlap to fight against mining, coal and all other sorts. So that yearly conference will keep going, and hopefully the resistance will grow to it, as well as a story of what a more positive future can be. Because I think that's something that could help blockading be more effective, is pairing the no with what do we actually want, where does it exist and how can we help it grow.
Yeah, which is, I guess, the other side of direct action. It's not all getting in the way. Direct action is about doing, not waiting for permission, but going and making things.
Yeah, exactly. And how we relate to each other and building a new world and all of those really, really important conversations.
All right. Thanks very much, Alice.
No problem.
on the paradigm shift. That was Alice there from Frontline Action on Coal, talking about all the blockading, civil disobedience, non-violent direct action that has happened in the Adani campaign, and many hundreds of people have been arrested over the last 8 years or so in campaigns against finance companies, against contractors, and indeed stopping work on the construction of Adani's mine and railway. And I think, like the other people that we talked to today, Christian and Moira, I think there's a lot to celebrate about all that work and all those people, the connections that were made and the transformation that happened in all those people over that time, even though ultimately Adani's mine has been built. But we need to learn from these things if we're going to have movements that can make a better world. We need to be able to reflect on what we've done and what we did well, which there are many things in the Adani campaign, what we could have done better, and that's hopefully some of the things that we've talked about today and where we can go from here. So if you are listening and been inspired, then there'll be another campaign that you can be involved in, I promise, and it will need all hands on deck because we have an immense task ahead of us to try to stop disastrous climate change, as the most recent IPCC report came out earlier this week again reiterated to us. So get out there and get on board. Frontline Action on Coal or Blockade IMARC, Tipping Point and the Stop Adani local groups and market forces, they'll all keep going, and they'll all be targeting other aspects of the fossil fuel industry. And of course, the Adani campaign is not over yet. Wangan and Jagalingou people are still out on Adani's mine lease. They've got their Watanungu ceremony, and they've been there for now well over 200 days camped out. It's an incredible feat through the extremely inhospitable summer weather of central Queensland, and it's been a really powerful demonstration of culture, one more step in the long resistance of Wangan and Jagalingou people to the Adani mine, and in fact of Aboriginal people in this country trying to resist the destruction in all kinds of ways of the natural world and this country on which we rely. And so you can still keep an eye on Wangan and Jagalingou on social media, on what they're up to. As Moira said, there is a tour to Carmichael coming up. You can join them. And I think I myself have spent a lot of time on the Adani mine, and it's been a mixed emotions thinking back over it. There's a lot of sadness, and I think it is a reality check of there has been an incredible movement and a lot of work gone into it, and yet we're still not able to stop it. We are fighting its very powerful interests who, despite the craziness of what they're doing, knowingly destroying our climate, they're still managing to do it. And so there's a lot of sadness there, but there's also a lot to be thankful for, incredible efforts from all kinds of amazing people, and it's really special to be a part of a movement like that. And of course, what can we do? The alternative is to sit and watch while our world gets destroyed, and it doesn't sound too exciting to me, and so I won't be giving up. See you next week.